Okay, so everything you say can be used against you. All right, welcome and thank you very much for joining. Hold on one second. There we go. All right, so today we're going to talk about two Alexises. And today will be the last gathering that we have until the new year. All right. I just think it's, as we get closer, next week is Christmas week, so we might as well do that. And then the week after is the week between. So new year. All right. And we'll probably pick up with a new topic. One that was given to me by a parishioner. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Probably not, but I'm going to try. Okay. Actually, I'll have to look it up. But basically, it's about miracles and other aspects of the church. So I thought that would be an interesting thing for us to bring up and talk about. So that's what we're going to do. I'll send more details out as we go, but we'll have plenty of time. Okay, so Alexis Toth. I want to say a few things about him first from a personal experience standpoint. I actually went to his canonization. You can see that icon that's on the screen there, and the icon's the one that has all the different little icons around the border. The one on the bottom right has two hierarchs. One of those is Metropolitan Theodosius. I think the other is Metropolitan Herman. Or not Metropolitan, Bishop Herman at the time. He was a Metropolitan later on. The picture has Alexis being elevated, but you also see that building in between the two hierarchs. That's St. Tikhon's monastery / seminary. That's the church there on the grounds. I was there. I was actually there for the service. I was there for the canonization. So you can't see me in the icon, but I might as well be there too. How exciting. So yeah, it was interesting to see. I had never seen anything like it in my life. One of the things they do, of course, is they exhume the body. So you get to see the whole body. And they also have, by that time, a relic that you then venerate, which means kiss it or can kiss it. So yeah, that was an interesting experience. I wasn't Orthodox yet. I was really close to being Orthodox. It was over the summer of 1994. I was canonized. I was not canonized. I don't think I'll ever be canonized, but I was chrismated. I was chrismated in oh goodness. I think we have a problem. Yes, we do have a problem. I forgot to hook you up to the right internet. So let me see. Rana, I'm gonna do something right now. I'm gonna make you the host. And then I'm gonna disappear for a minute and come back. Okay, so I'm gonna make you the host. And then I'm gonna turn off my network and come back. I'll be right back. Okay, can everyone hear me okay outside?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right.
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, so let's talk about Alexis Toth. Forgive me. So our Holy Father Alexis, the defender of the Orthodox faith and zealous worker in the Lord's vineyard, was born in Austria-Hungary, March 18th, 1854, into a poor Carpatho-Russian family. So like many other of the OCA, they come from that area, the Austria-Hungarian region. There are, of course, Russians in the OCA as well, but that a large number, and especially in America, are from that area. Even people like Father Tom Hopko, people like that. All right. Like many others in that empire, the Toths were Eastern Rite Catholics. Alexis's father and brother were both priests, and his uncle was a bishop in that church, the Uniate Church. He received an excellent education, knew several languages, including the Carpatho-Russian language. He knew Hungarian, Russian, German, Latin, and had a working knowledge of Greek. That's pretty impressive. He married Rosalie Mihalic, a priest's daughter. He was ordained on April 18th, 1878, served as a second priest in a parish. However, his wife and their only child both died immediately afterwards. And so the poor saint endured much hardship very early on in his life. As a side note, I don't know how many of you know Archbishop Michael de Hulich. He is actually from not this area, but a little bit south of here. And he had a very similar experience. He had just become a priest, and he and his wife were driving somewhere, and they were in a car accident, and she died. And so he also, he now serves as the Archbishop of, I think, New Jersey in the Orthodox Church in America. He's a great man. I've known him for many years, and very, very intelligent and compassionate man. Anyway, so this is what happened to poor Father Alexis also. In May of 1879, Father Alexis was appointed secretary to the Bishop of Prešov and the diocesan administration. He was entrusted with the directorship of an orphanage. At the seminary there, he taught church history and canon law. That proved to serve him well once he began his work in America. St. Alexis did not serve there for very long, because he was destined to go to America in October 1889, where he began to serve a Uniate parish in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So upon his arrival in America, Father Alexis presented himself to the local Roman Catholic diocesan authority, an archbishop by the name of John Ireland, interesting name. Since there was no Uniate bishop in America at the time, Archbishop Ireland belonged to a group of Catholics who favored the Americanization of all Roman Catholics. So his vision for the future was based on a common faith and common customs, and the use of English exclusively except in the liturgical celebrations, which would have been Latin. Naturally, ethnic parishes and non-Latin rite clergy did not fit in this vision. Thus, when Father Toth came to present his credentials, Archbishop Ireland greeted him with open hostility. He refused to recognize him as a legitimate Catholic priest or to grant permission for him to serve in his diocese. As a historian and professor of canon law, Father Toth knew his rights under the terms of the Unia and would not accept the Archbishop's unright decision. In October of 1890, there was a meeting of 8 of the 10 Uniate priests in America in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, under the chairmanship of Father Toth. By this time, the American bishops had written to Rome demanding to recall to Europe of all Uniate priests in America, fearing that Uniate priests and parishes would hinder the assimilation of immigrants into the American culture. Okay, so this is what Ireland did. He was demanding the American Roman Catholic bishops were demanding that all the Uniate priests in America be expelled. That's not very accommodating. Okay, so the Uniate bishops in Europe refused to listen to the priests' plea for help, which is also unfortunate. Archbishop Ireland sent a letter to his parishes ordering their members not to attend Father Toth's parish, nor to accept any priestly ministrations from him. Expecting imminent deportation, Father Toth explained the situation to his parishioners and suggested that it might be best for him to leave and to return to Europe. No, they said, let's go to the Russian bishop. Why should we always submit ourselves to foreigners? That's interesting. It was decided to write to the Russian consul in San Francisco in order to ask for the name and address of the Russian bishop. Ivan Mliner went to San Francisco to make initial contact with Bishop Vladimir. Then, in February 1891, Father Toth and his church warden, Paul Padani, also made the journey. Subsequently, Bishop Vladimir came to Minneapolis, and on March 25th, 1881, received Father Toth and 361 parishioners into the Orthodox Church of their ancestors. The parishioners regarded this event as a new triumph of Orthodoxy, crying out with joy, "Glory to God for his great mercy." Okay, if you have any questions, let me know. But before we get too far along in this narrative, you can understand in a similar sense, but not because of the religious experience, this is common amongst most Orthodox. Okay, even your ancestors, the Syrians, the Russians, they did not have an easy time when they came to this country. Especially on the religious side of things. Also bear in mind that even the Catholic Church in certain areas had open hostilities visited on them. So it's not like things were easy for them either. Of course, because of things like common language and stuff. But remember, let's put it this way. Remember that America was founded on so-called religious freedoms, but you look at the state of Maryland, for example, my little beloved Maryland, and how the Catholic churches that were built there were openly burned by the Anglicans of Virginia. So it's always we've always had these kinds of hostilities. And so when you get to the second wave of immigration, which happens around in the 1870s and beyond, the ones who are already established are openly hostile to the ones that start coming over. So that includes the Slavs, that includes, the Greeks, the Syrians, pretty much everybody that comes from the eastern part of the Mediterranean and down into the eastern, all of that. I mean, it does tend to, the discrimination and the open hostility are pretty apparent from the start. Okay. So it does kind of stand to reason that St. Alexis and his congregation would have this kind of difficulty. All right. Anyone want to add anything or any questions or anything?
I have a question.
Sure.
What is meant by the Union Church?
Okay. So it's meant, that is a term that is used to describe Eastern Christians that are under Rome. Okay. And it has to do with political accommodation. You see, part of this has to do with in that region, the political leaders at the time, the kings and the princes, were loyal to the Pope. Okay. But they didn't force their people to change from their Orthodox ways. There was that comment, I think, I don't know if I actually read it out loud. We'll kind of skip over certain things. It says that on March 25th, 1891, the parishioners received into the Orthodox Church of their ancestors, is how it's put in this particular hagiography. So the Uniots are those who get along with the Catholics but are Eastern Rite. Okay, so they're like us in terms of their worship, but they are Catholic in their polity. So I think the classic example, is your family from the Lindora Church, Rana?
Yes.
Okay. Are you familiar with their history?
Well, I do know about St. John's Byzantine Catholic Church.
Right.
And I do also know that there's a Ukrainian Catholic church that my friend used to attend when she was little, and she said the priest there was married at the time.
Right.
But in our Orthodox church, I don't know actually much about the background of it, actually.
Well, St. Peter and Paul is actually an offshoot of that Ukrainian Orthodox Church.
Of the
There used to be two brothers, or Ukrainian Catholic Church.
Yeah.
There used to be two brothers, right? And they got into this fight. And under the cover of darkness in the midnight hours, one of the brothers grabbed all of the antimons and things like that, the religious articles, off the altar and absconded with them and formed a new church, the Orthodox one.
Wow.
Okay. So it's a rather interesting story, but yeah, the two churches, the Ukrainian Catholic Church and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, are actually founded by two brothers that didn't like each other. Yeah. And you can sort of see how that would kind of carry through. That's the whole thing about St. Alexis is that the Roman Catholics had just openly received him and welcomed them in, as they should have. They would have not, I mean, Saint Alexis wouldn't be Saint Alexis. He'd just be Father Alexis as a Uniate priest. And just to kind of explain things a little bit, you heard what I said earlier, that the Roman Catholics were one of the ones that were under persecution before the Great Immigration, right? And so their big fear is assimilation. They want to look like everyone else. They want to match their appearance. They want to match their language. They don't want to stick out. And if you think about it, not the generation of the elders in our church now, but their parents made conscious decisions on whether they were going to speak Arabic at home or if they're going to make their kids learn English. We have experienced both in our church. There's one family who deeply laments that they never learned any Arabic, and that's because their parents didn't let them learn Arabic. And then there are other parents who openly spoke Arabic at home and wanted their kids to figure it out. So assimilation was the big concern, because if you don't assimilate, you get discriminated against. That was basically what happened. You got persecuted in some way, shape, or form. So the Roman bishops would want to kind of get up to speed as fast as possible. And so their Americanization program, it's flawed, of course, but its intention was meant to be constructive. It wasn't constructive, but it was intended to be. Okay, so I'm not letting them off the hook necessarily, but I'm just basically trying to explain why something like that would happen. America was not very tolerant of different people. I mean, my mom, growing up on the streets, the mean streets of Greensburg, Pennsylvania, her best friend was Catholic at the time, and my grandparents' friends tried very hard to dissuade my grandparents from letting my mom have a Catholic friend. If you were Protestant, you'd walk on the other side of the street from a Catholic church, because I might suck you in and convert you or something. I don't know. Okay, so you can kind of get the picture. It's not very pleasant. Anyway, okay, so going back. Again, feel free to stop me if you have any questions. So, okay, the example of St. Alexis and his parish in returning to orthodoxy was an encouragement to hundreds of other uniates. The ever memorable one was like a candle upon a candlestick, giving light to others. And his flock may be likened to the leaven mixed with meal, which leavened the whole lump. I love hagiographies, don't you? So hagiography, it's the story of a saint that's somewhat historical, but it's kind of flowery. You add superlatives and holy references to show the sanctity of the person. So it's not meant to be like a history book. We're not going to learn about this in our public schools, but it's worth learning about in church. Okay, through his fearless preaching, he uprooted the tares which had sprung up in the wheat of true doctrine, and exposed the false teachings which had led his people astray. Although he did not hesitate to point out errors in doctrines of other denominations, he was careful to warn his flock against intolerance. His writings and sermons are filled with admonitions to respect other people and to refrain from attacking their faith. Preach, St. Alexis. While it is true that he made some strong comments, especially in his private correspondence with church administration, it must be remembered that this was done while defending the Orthodox Church and the American mission from unfounded accusations by people who use much harsher language than Father Toth. His opponents may be characterized by intolerance, rude behavior, unethical methods, and threats against him and his parishioners. Yet when Father Alexis was offended or deceived by other people, he forgave them, and he would often ask his bishop to forgive his omissions and his mistakes. That's a good way to live as a Christian. In the midst of great hardships, this herald of godly theology and sound doctrine poured forth an inexhaustible stream of Orthodox writings for new converts and gave practical advice on how to live in an Orthodox manner. For example, his article, How We Should Live in America, stresses the importance of education, cleanliness, sobriety, and the presence of children in church on Sundays and holy days. I like that. Children should be present in church, always. All right. Although the Minneapolis parish was received into the Holy Orthodox Church in March 1891, it was not until July 1892 that the Holy Synod of Russia recognized and accepted the parish into the Diocese of Alaska and the Aleutians. Remember, that's pretty much it at that point. This resolution received America only in October. Oh, this resolution reached America only in October 1892. During that time, there was a climate of religious and ethnic hostility against the new converts. Father Alexis was accused of selling out his own Carpatho-Russian people in his religion to the Muscovites for financial gain. In reality, he did not receive any financial support for a long time, for his parish was very poor. Until his priestly salary began to arrive from Russia, the righteous one was obliged to work in a bakery in order to support himself. Even though his funds were meager, he did not neglect to give alms to the poor and to the needy. He shared his he shared his money with other clergy, worse off than himself, and contributed to building of churches and to the education of seminarians in Minneapolis. He was not anxious about his life, what he would eat or drink or wear, as it says in the scriptures. Trusting in God to take care of him, St. Alexis followed the admonition of our Savior. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. See Matthew 6:33. So he bore tribulation, slander, and physical attacks with patience and with spiritual joy, reminding us that godliness is stronger than all. See the wisdom of Solomon, chapter 10, verse 12. Bishops Vladimir, Nicholas, St. Tikhon, and Platon recognized the special gifts of Father Toth. So they often sent him forth to preach and teach wherever there were people of a Slavic background. Even though he was aware of his shortcomings and his inadequacies, yet he was obedient to the instructions of bishops, and he did not hesitate or make excuses, but went immediately to fulfill his mission. St. Alexis visited many Uniate parishes, explaining the differences between Orthodoxy, Protestantism, Roman Catholicism, and Uniatism, stressing that the true way to salvation is in Orthodoxy. Okay, so let's hang on for a second. I want to go back to something that was mentioned in passing. So in most Orthodox countries, I dare say most Orthodox countries, we are not an Orthodox country, okay? In most Orthodox countries, the government pays the priests, right? You go to Greece, government pays the priest. I think that's stopping, but that has certainly been the case for a very long time. In Russia, at that time, it was the same. So think about it this way. You have a group of people that say, hey, we're an Orthodox church and we want to be part of you. Well, that church is then going to have to say, well, okay, but that means we'd have to pay you. We don't know you. Who are you? So they would have to go through some vetting, right? They wouldn't just start receiving a stipend or whatever. But that's what ended up happening. Right up until the Bolshevik Revolution, the Russian church paid the priests in America, okay? The ones that were under the Omophorian of the Church of the Aleuts. Now, another thing to point out is that very shortly after all of this, the seat of Orthodoxy moves from Alaska into San Francisco. Okay, so San Francisco becomes the cathedral space for the entire Orthodox Church. Now, that does not include all of America. There are Greeks already present in Florida, around the area of St. Augustine, Florida. So they are a completely different group, and they really had no dealings whatsoever with the church in California. They didn't have a dealing with anybody, to be honest with you. I mean, they didn't spread out or anything. They just basically stayed in that area for some time, and justifiably so. I mean, you know, Fort Lauderdale, they could make livings there. They weren't evangelical in mind. So there you have it. Okay. All right. Any other questions about anything so far? Awesome. Okay, so like Josiah, see this wisdom of Ben Sirach 49:2, he behaved himself uprightly in the conversion of his people. He was instrumental in the formation or return of 17 parishes, planting a vineyard of Christ in America and increasing its fruitful yield many times over. So he's very much like our St. Raphael. By 1909, the time of his blessed repose, many thousands of Carpatho-Russians, Gallican Uniates, had returned to Orthodoxy. This was a major event in the history of the North American mission, which would continue to shape the future of Orthodoxy in this country for more generations to come. Any future growth or success may truly be regarded as a result of Father Toth's apostolic labors, in that particular area anyway. Okay, so who can tell of the saint's spiritual struggles? Who can speak of the prayers which his pious soul poured forth unto God? He did not make a public display of his piety, but he prayed to God in secret with all modesty, with contrition and inward tears. God, who sees everything done in secretly, openly rewarded the saint. It is inconceivable that Saint Alexis could have accomplished his apostolic labors unless God had blessed and strengthened him for such work. Today, the church continues to reap the fruits of his teaching and his preaching. Okay, let's see. So I'm going to skip ahead because we're almost at halftime here. But in January 1993, a certain man prayed to St. Alexis to help him to obtain information about his son, from whom he had been separated for 28 years. Placing his confidence in the saint's boldness before God, he waited an answer to his prayer. The very next day, the man's son telephoned him. It seems the young man was in church when he suddenly was filled with an overwhelming desire to contact his father. He had been taken to another state by his mother. She changed his name when he was a child. This is why his father was unable to locate him. Having learned from his mother that his father was an Orthodox Christian, he was able to, with the help of an Orthodox priest, to obtain his father's phone number in a distant city. As a result of the telephone call, the young man later visited his father, who rejoiced to see what sort of man his son had become. The father gave thanks to God and to St. Alexis for reuniting him with his son. Remember, one of the things that we look for in pursuit of whether or not someone is a saint is, are there any intercessions or miracles that happen that are associated with the saint? So this is a great example of that. St. Alexis was a true man of God who guided many Carpatho-Russians and Galician immigrants through the dark confusion of religious challenges in the New World and back to the unity of the Orthodox Church through his grace-filled words and by his holy example. In his last will and testament, St. Alexis commended his soul to God's mercy, asking forgiveness from everyone and forgiving everybody. His holy relics now rest at St. Tikhon's Monastery in South Canaan, Pennsylvania, very close to Wilkes-Barre, where the faithful may come to venerate them and to entreat St. Alexis's intercessions on their behalf. So through his intercessions, may God have mercy on us all. Amen.
He interceded for that man.
Yeah, to find his son. That's awesome, huh? Yeah. Okay. Any questions about Saint Alexis? What I love about Saint Alexis and also Saint Raphael, they were made saints almost exactly at the same time. Saint Alexis was first in 94, like I said, and then Saint Raphael maybe just after the turn of the century. So, reasonably close, but both of them really epitomize the kind of missionary zeal that you need to have in this country. They weren't openly harsh towards people that they disagreed with. They weren't hostile towards other ideas. They just showed the way of truth and mercy through their example and through their teachings. St. Raphael went all over the country, tirelessly bringing people together. He was a collector of the lost sheep. And St. Alexis did pretty much the same thing. He gave them an opportunity to explore holy orthodoxy, which was the faith of their ancestors, in a way, but instructed them all not to denigrate other churches or other organizations. I think one of the problems that we run into today in trying to convert people is we're too interested in telling everybody what they're doing wrong. I think it's really helpful for us to point out what we're doing right and show people why it would be so beneficial for them to be a part of our community where we worship in spirit and truth, we worship the undivided Trinity, we receive the pure and holy body and blood of Christ every liturgy, and we bring God together with his people in the Holy Liturgy and in other things that we do. I think those things are much more beneficial than me just sitting here and saying, this is where this church is wrong, and this is where that church is wrong, and this is where that organization is wrong. I mean, I can do that all day too, but I just don't think that that's really the way to go. I think that's not very constructive or helpful. So I think we can learn from people like them, and we should learn from people like them and do what we can to, in a positive way, bring people together. And I'll be honest, I think we are products of our culture. I don't know if you've noticed, but most election cycles now are based on not vote for me because of me, but vote for me because the other guy's lousy. You know, that's kind of pathetic. I don't have anything to say, but at least what I have to say is better than that person over there. I mean, that's kind of silly, right? And that's certainly not the way to do things. So, especially us in the church, we should focus on the things that build up, not destroy. Okay, end of sermon. Any other questions? Anybody? You have any questions? Okay. Now for something completely different. Alexander Nevsky. Now, why did I think of Alexander Nevsky? Well, two reasons. Because we've already talked about two of Rana's kids, so I thought we'd do the third one. I'm sort of kidding, but not really. St. Nicholas is patron number one, and with Catherine, another, and then now we're on to Alexander. So I thought it would be neat to do all three of her kids. But also, Alexander Nevsky is the name of the cathedral of the Orthodox Church in Pittsburgh. It actually was the oldest. Well, maybe St. Michael's is slightly older, but it's the oldest presence in Pittsburgh of the Orthodox. And so I thought it'd be interesting to talk about St. Alexander, since it's such a pivotal figure in Orthodoxy in Western Pennsylvania. Okay. So here's Alexander Nevsky. The Holy Prince Alexander Nevsky was born on May 30th in the year 2020. Or no, not 2020, 1220 in the city, well, I'm not going to, Pereslavo-Zalesk. His father was Yaroslav II, Theodore in baptism, and he died in 1246, a gentle and kindly and genial prince. Okay. Anyway, I'm not going to get into the family lineage because that really doesn't help us at this point. The oldest son was Holy Prince Theodore, who departed to the Lord at the age of 15. St. Alexander was his brother and their second son. His childhood was spent in the same town of Pereslava-Zalesk, where his father was prince. The princely tonsure of the lad Alexander, a ceremony of initiation to be a soldier, was done in the Savior Transfiguration Cathedral by St. Simon, the Bishop of Suzdal, on May 10th. And he is involved. He compiled the lives of the saints who lived in the Kievan caves. That is one of the oldest landmarks of Orthodoxy in the Slavic regions, the Kiev caves. Okay, that's a very important thing for the Orthodox Church. There are chants that are derived from that area. I do not know where they are in reference to what's going on in today's unpleasantnesses, but you can see, even from here, you have tight references to Russia, but everything has to do with Kiev, okay? So the Church of Russia sees Kiev as its holy origin point, which is why there's such a contest between the people of Ukraine versus the people of Russia, because they both see Kiev or Kyiv as their spiritual home, okay? It's not going to get solved through bombs. It's not going to get solved through politics, and it's not going to get solved in our lifetimes, okay? But this is one of those things where the blurring is very clear. And it gets even more convoluted. We're not going to talk about this at great length, but it gets more convoluted when you have the ecumenical patriarch granting a new church in that area after they had been Russian for so many years. So it's an interesting experience for everybody. Okay, so I'm going to share. Okay, so that's the icon of St. Alexander for those at home. All right. Okay, so let's see. From this, the elder hierarch St. Alexander received his first blessing for military service in the name of God to defend the Russian church and the Russian land. In 1227, Prince Yaroslav, at the request of the people of Novgorod, was sent by his brother, the great Prince of Vladimir, to rule as Prince of Novgorod, and he took his sons Theodore and Alexander. Let me keep going. So there grew, the people didn't like the transfer. They didn't actually like Saint Alexander. They didn't like Saint Theodore. So they actually asked someone else to come in his place. There was a bit of a dispute for a time, but the matter finally ended peacefully. And the saints were allowed to remain in that area at that time. From his early years, Saint Alexander went along on his father's campaigns, his battles. In 1235, he participated in a battle in the land of Estonia, where the forces of Yaroslav totally routed the Germans. In the following year, Yaroslav went to Kiev, settling his son to rule independently as Prince of Novgorod. In 1239, St. Alexander entered into marriage, taking as wife the daughter of the Politzian Prince Bratislav. Some historians relate this day the princess was baptized the name gave her saintly spouse, so she was named Alexandra. His father Yaroslav blessed them at the betrothal with the holy wonder-working icon of Theodore, the Mother of God. The father was named Theodore in baptism. Afterwards, St. Alexander constantly prayed before this icon. Later, it was taken from the Gorostet monastery where he died by his brother Basil and transferred to another place. When another troublesome time happened in Russian history. Everyone's familiar with the Mongols, right? From the east, the Mongolian horde came and destroyed everything in their path. From west came the forces of the Teutonic Knights. Those are in the land of Germany, which blasphemously, and with the blessing of the Roman Pope, called themselves the Cross Bearers by wearing the cross of the Lord. So on one side, you've got the Mongolians. On the other side, you have the Teutonic warriors, and Russia's sort of in the middle. In this terrible hour, the providence of God raised up for the salvation of Russia the holy Prince Alexander, a great warrior, a man of prayer, an ascetic, and an upholder of the land of Russia. Without the command of God, there would not have been his priest. So there was an invasion in a land called Batu. By the dismay of a great nation, by the destruction of its finest sons and leader, a horde of crusaders made incursions into the borders of Russia. First, there were the Swedes. So you kind of get that Russia's in the middle of everything. Okay, so on one hand, you've got the Norwegians, you've got the Swedes, you've got the Germans, you've got the Teutonic Knights, all these different groups on the west side of everything. On the east side, you have like Genghis Khan and others of that particular. So it's a very difficult time, as you can see. And so what happened is Alexander rises and becomes this great defender of the Russian state. Okay, so during all of this time, they're again facing incursions from the Swedes. And during this time, St. Alexander wasn't even 20 years old yet. He prayed for a long time in the church of St. Sophia, which means the wisdom of God. And he recited a psalm of David saying, "Judge, O Lord, those who injure me. Fight against those who fight against me. Take hold of shield and buckler and rise up to help me," which is Psalm 34. Archbishop Spiridon blessed the Holy Prince and his army for battle. Leaving the church, St. Alexander exhorted his troops with the words of faith. The power of God is not in numbers, but in truth. With a smaller force, but trusting in the Holy Trinity, the prince hastened towards the enemy to await help from his father, not knowing whether the enemy would attack nor when. But there was a miraculous omen. On July 15th, a warrior Pelugi, the baptism Philip, saw a boat, and on the boat he saw the holy martyrs, Boris and Gleb, in purple attire. Boris said, "Brother Gleb, let us help our kinsman Alexander." When Pelgui reported this vision to the prince, St. Alexander commanded that no one should speak about the miracle. Emboldened by this, he urged the army to fight valiantly against the Swedes. There was a great routing of the Latins, and a countless multitude were put down, and their leader was left with a mark upon his face with a sharp spear. An angel of God invisibly helped the Orthodox army. When morning came on the opposite bank of the river, where the army of St. Alexander was unable to proceed, there was a multitude of the slain army. Because of this victory at the river Neva on July 15th, 1240, the nation called the Saint Alexander Nevsky. The Teutonic Knights remained a dangerous enemy. In a lightning-quick campaign in 1241, St. Alexander recaptured the ancient Russian fortress of Kopore, expelling the knights. But in 1242, the Germans succeeded in capturing Pskov. The enemy boasted of subjecting all the Slavic nation. St. Alexander, setting forth in a winter campaign, liberated the same city, that ancient home of the Holy Trinity, Icon. In the spring of that year of 1242, he fought a decisive battle against the Teutonic Order. On the ice of Lake Cloud, both armies clashed on April 5th, 1242. Raising his hands towards the heavens, St. Alexander prayed, "Judge me, O God, judge my strife with a boastful nation, and grant help to me, O God, as to Moses of old against Amalek, and as to my great-grandfather Yaroslav the Slav against the accursed Svayapolk." Okay, so what are we looking at there? What I want to make a point there. Oh, yeah, the point I was going to make. When you think of World War II and some of the mythology that was wrapped up in Hitler's desire for conquest, one of them was that he wanted to envision his army like these armies of the Teutonic Knights. He called you have the word Kaiser, which actually doesn't apply to Hitler, but to those who come before him. Kaiser is the German word for Caesar. Okay, it's exactly the same word. It's just Germanized, right? And same as Tsar. It's all the same word. Okay, it just means a ruler. But Hitler fashioned himself the improvement of these armies. And so you can see in his history how he would go into Russia and try to lay waste to them, just as the ancestors, Hitler was Austrian, he wasn't even German, but you can see how he's trying to play into the history of the Teutonic Knights and all of the stuff that he was doing. Okay, so continuing on here. By his prayer, by the help of God, and by military might, the Crusaders were completely destroyed. There was a terrible slaughter, and there was such a crashing of striking spears and swords that it seemed as though the frozen lake were in motion and not solid ice, since it was covered with blood. When they turned to flee, the enemy was pursued and slashed by Alexander's army as if they sped through the air, and there was nowhere for the enemy to flee. Later, they led a multitude of captives behind the Holy Prince, marching in disgrace. Contemporaries clearly understood the universal historical significance of the great battle of the ice, and the name of Saint Alexander was celebrated throughout Holy Russia, through all the lands, from the Egyptian Sea to Mount Ararat, both sides of the Varangian Sea to Great Rome. The western boundaries of the Russian land were safely secured, and it was time for Russia to guard from the east. In 1242, St. Alexander Nevsky and his father Yaroslav journeyed to the horde. Metropolitan Cyril blessed them for this new service of many hardships. It was necessary to turn to the Tartars, turn them from enemies and plunderers into honorable allies, and this required the meekness of an angel and the wisdom of a snake. Okay, the Lord crowned the holy mission of the defenders of the Russian land with success, but this required years of hardship and sacrifice. Having made an alliance with Khan Batu, Prince Yaroslav was required to travel to faraway Mongolia, to the capital of all the nomadic empire. The situation of Batu himself being precarious, he sought the support of the Russian princes, wishing to break with his own golden horde away from Mongolia, and there in turn he trusted neither Batu nor the Russians. Prince Yaroslav was poisoned. He died in agony, surviving the holy martyr Michael of Chernigov, whose relative he nearly became by only 10 days. Since his father bequeathed him an alliance with the Golden Horde, it was necessary for Saint Alexander to hold fast to it in order to avert a new devastation of Russia. Sartak, the son of Batu, had accepted Christianity and was in charge of Russian affairs with the Horde, became his friend, and like a brother to him, vowing support, Saint Alexander allowed Batu to launch a campaign against Mongolia, to become the chief power in all the steppes, and to raise the Tartar Christian leader Khan Monki. Most of his Tartar Christians were Nestorian on the throne in Mongolia. Not all the Russian princes possessed the wisdom of Saint Alexander. Many hoped for European help in the struggle against the Mongol yoke. Saint Michael of Chernigov, the Prince Daniel of Galich, and Andrew, Saint Alexander's brother, conducted negotiations with the Roman Pope. But Saint Alexander well knew the fate of Constantinople. Seized and devastated by crusaders in the year 1204, his own personal experience taught him not to trust the West. The alliance of Daniel of Galich with the Pope, giving him nothing in return, was a betrayal of orthodoxy, a unia with Rome. See, there's that word uniat again, okay? And St. Alexander did not want this to happen to the church. When ambassadors of the Roman Pope appeared in 1248 to try to convince him also, he wrote in answer that the Russians were faithful to the Church of Christ and to the belief of the 7 ecumenical councils. These we know very well, but we do not accept your teaching. Catholicism was unsuitable for the Russian church, and a unia signified a rejection of orthodoxy, a rejection of the source of spiritual life, a rejection of the historical future foreordained by God, and a dooming of itself to spiritual death. Okay, let's see. In the year 1252, many Russian cities rose up against the Tartar yoke, supporting Andrew Yaroslavich. The situation again was very risky. There again rose a threat to the very existence of Russia. Saint Alexander had to journey to the Horde once more in order to prevent a punitive Tartar incursion on Russian lands. Defeated, Andrew fled to the Swedes, seeking the help of those very robbers from whom his great brother had crushed with the help of God at the Neva. Saint Alexander became a great ruling prince of all Russia, Vladimir, Kiev, and Novgorod. Remember, in that time, Russia isn't a city, like a big country. It's actually got little city-states. Okay, so Kiev would be one, Novgorod, which is a city, but that's the city and surrounding areas. And the same with Vladimir. Vladimir is actually a city, and so you would also have that as a large metropolitan region. So all these are different metro regions. Okay. A great responsibility before God and history lay upon his shoulders. In 1253, he repelled a new German incursion against Pskov. In 1254, he made a treaty with Norway concerning peacetime borders. In 1256, he went on a campaign to the Finnish lands. A chronicler called it the Dark Campaign because the Russian army went along through the polar night, going to impassable places, unable to see either day or night. Into the darkness of paganism, St. Alexander brought the light of gospel preaching and Orthodox culture. All the coastal region was enlightened and opened up by the Russians. 1256, Khan Batu died, and soon his son Startak was poisoned, the one who was like a brother to Alexander Nevsky. The Holy Prince journeyed a third time to Sarai in order to confirm peaceful relations of Russia and the Horde, or Rus as they would call it, and the Horde, with the new Khan Berki. Although the successor to Batu had accepted Islam, he needed the alliance of the Orthodox. In 1261, by the diligent efforts of St. Alexander and Metropolitan Cyril, a diocese of the Russian Orthodox Church was established at Sarai, the capital of the Golden Horde. There followed an epoch of great Christianization of the pagan East, and St. Alexander Nevsky prophetically speculated about the historical vocation of Rus. The Holy Prince used every possibility to uplift his native land and ease its allotted cross. In 1262, by his decree, in many of the cities, the Tartar collectors of tribute and the conscription of the soldiers was stopped. They waited for Tartar reprisals, but the great intercessor of a nation again journeyed to the horde, and he wisely directed the event into quite another channel. Having been dismissed for the uprising of the Russians, Khan Berke ceased to send tribute to Mongolia and proclaimed the Golden Horde an independent entity, making it a veritable shield for Russia from the east. In this great uniting of the Russian and Tartar lands and people, the future multinational Russian state was matured and strengthened. Later, within the bounds of the Russian Church, was encompassed nearly the entire legacy of Genghis Khan to the coasts of the Pacific Ocean. I'm familiar with Genghis Khan, one of the greatest of the Khans. This diplomatic journey of St. Alexander to Sarai was his fourth and last. The future of Rus was rescued. His duty before God was fulfilled, but his power was wholly devoted, and his life was put to service of the Russian Church. In return from his journey from the horde, St. Alexander fell deathly ill. Unable to reach Vladimir in a monastery at Gorodets, the Prince ascetic gave up the spirit to the Lord on November 14th, 1263, completing his difficult earthly path by receiving the monastic schema, the name of Alexis. Metropolitan Cyril, the spiritual father and companion of the Holy Prince, said in the funeral liturgy, "Know, my child, that already the sun has set for the land of Sizdal. There will no longer be a greater prince in the Russian land." They took his holy body to Vladimir, and the journey lasted 9 days, and the body remained undecayed. On November 23rd, before his burial at the Nativity Monastery in Vladimir, there was manifest by God a wondrous miracle worthy of memory. When the body of the saint was placed in the crypt, the steward Sebastian and the Metropolitan Cyril wanted to take his hand in order to put in the spiritual grammata, which is a document of absolution. The Holy Prince, as though alive, reached out his hand and took the document from the hand of the Metropolitan. Because of their terror, they were barely able to stumble from his tomb. Who would not be astonished at this, since he was dead and the body was brought from far away in the wintertime? Thus did God glorify the saintly soldier prince Alexander Nevsky. The universal church glorification of St. Alexander took place under Metropolitan Macarius at the Moscow Cathedral in 1547, which is after the start of the Protestant, whatever you want to call that. The canon to the saint was compiled at the time by the monk Michael of Vladimir. And that is his story. So a couple of other things about St. Alexander. As I said, it's one of the earliest churches in Pittsburgh. Its original location was right in what was called Allegheny Township, which is on the north side of the Allegheny River, close to Allegheny Hospital. Okay, it was there. It actually moved up to Allison Park in the early 70s. Holy Trinity Greek Orthodox Church was also right there along the Allegheny River, and they moved up to where they presently are just a few years ago. So they were both churches in that particular area. St. Michael's was actually located in the Hill District of Pittsburgh, and I do believe that actually is the oldest of all the churches. Yeah. And that church was actually under the possession of Paul Abernathy, Father Paul Abernathy, of the Resilience Project. I think they have just decided that the church itself is not habitable. I don't think they can use it. But they are definitely, that is a focal point for, there's a lot of Orthodox in the Hill District. There was actually what is now St. George's Antiochian Orthodox Church in Pittsburgh was actually two churches that merged into one. One church was located in the Hill District. The other was located either in Munhall or Homestead. One of those two places. So, the history of Orthodoxy in Pittsburgh is a very interesting history, and it's a very old history. Of course, St. Raphael came and founded churches in New Kensington and Monessen, and so forth. We have a church, of course, in Bridgeville. So yeah, there and Brownsville. So we have a lot of connections to all of that. And I just thought it'd be interesting to talk about St. Alexander. Another interesting thing about Alexander, obviously, he's more a warrior saint than an ascetic or anything like that. But the other thing, you sort of caught it obliquely, but it was still there. When the prisoners were captured, they were marched behind St. Alexander. Okay, so he brought them, and it's kind of humiliating, sure, but he abolished the death penalty. He did not allow anyone to be executed. Okay, so that's one of the earliest exhibitions of a merciful treatment of captives in wartime. He did not believe that execution was appropriate for enemies in wartime. So I think that's an interesting thing. Yep. Okay, so there we have it. Any questions about anything?
Yes, I have one.
Sure.
I don't understand why the cathedral church would choose Alexander Nevsky as its patron. I don't get the connection there. I see why he's a great saint in Russia, but I don't see why he has anything to do with the church in Pittsburgh.
My hunch, I can't speak with any great authority here, but my hunch would be because he is seen as this great warrior saint. Pittsburgh, like it or not, is a city of war. Okay. It only grew because of the advancement of the steel industry. Okay. And what was the steel used for? Well, originally, when Carnegie was starting to make his money, it was in shore bridges and things like that, maybe buildings, but you cannot deny the weapons of war, metal for battleships, metal for weapons, tanks. I've seen pictures even from as late as the late 60s of just this huge line of tanks coming out of the city of Pittsburgh, not because they were being needed to control Pittsburgh, but because this is where they were manufactured. To return back to Butler for a second, Butler is where the Jeep was invented. So unfortunately, I think there is a very strong connection between the munitions and remember, most of the people that were working as Russians in Pittsburgh were working in the steel mills.
Okay.
They were the ones that were manning the blast furnaces because the Scots weren't going to do it. The Scots were busy bossing the Slavs around.
That's a very interesting connection. Thank you.
That would be my hunch. Okay. There's a lot of ethnic pride in Alexander Nevsky. There's a movie that was actually during communism. There was a movie on Alexander Nevsky that was released to great acclaim in Russia. Okay. Now, again, he's a warrior saint. He's Orthodox, right? But here are the communists are using Alexander Nevsky as a rallying point, a person to focus on, as they are trying to advance their cause. So they're trying to touch into this thing that's a very strong source of pride for the Russians.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think that's where it comes from, to be honest. It's a strong connection. He's a very strong figure in Russian culture. Huge. Probably bigger than I would honestly say certainly any warrior. He's the biggest warrior of them all, as far as they're concerned. I can't really compare him to anybody in America. The closest would be Patton, but Patton, wouldn't be seen as a warrior saint, just a warrior.
Mm-hmm.
We don't really have any warrior saints. You can take a look at the spirituality of George Washington if you want to, but I wouldn't go too far with that. So there we are. Okay. Any other questions about anything? Thank you, Mother. That was a great question. I appreciate that. But I think I'm right about that. I know it's kind of a obnoxious thing to say, but Pittsburgh's connection to the steel industry and, why did the steel industry die? But because our wartime, we weren't needed there were no wars, we had a surplus.
Right.
Now we get all our steel from France and China. So yeah.
That's fascinating, actually.
Any other questions, anybody?
No, it was very nice.
Okay. Well, God bless you. I thank you very much for joining me tonight, and we'll get together in the new year. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Next year.
Good night.
Here.
Thank
See
you,
next
Father.
year,
Thank
Mama.
you, Father.
You're very
We'll see
welcome.
you this
Good night.
year.
Thank you.
I hope.
Thanks.